Matrix is an exercise that I've been using for a number of years with my work with clients, particularly in the area of understanding the way the configuration and the shape of a team or network will affect their ability to perform. I've extended that work with several organizations to model actual organizations, to take a look at the impact of existing configurations, but also to explore other potential configurations of teams and networks to see if we can build in efficiency to their performance. And all that done in an experiential way, which is very characteristic of the way we work here at RSVP. The equipment in the Matrix bag means that we can accommodate up to 16 people in a network. Although I advocate that it's entirely possible to occupy several other people around the Matrix network. Some of them as observers, taking a look at the behaviors that are happening inside of that network, but also as consultants. One thing that you'll see about the Matrix activity is that what we have is people in fixed places in these networks. And I often suggest having people who are free to roam around those networks, which I dub as consultants, who can take a more active view, a more dynamic view of the way the network is operating. What I'd like to do first of all is to look at the objectives that we have. These are fairly general learning objectives that we offer, and obviously, if you have a specific purpose in using it, using the activity, it's perfectly possible to adapt these learning objectives to specific groups. So the first one of these is to explore the balance between individual and team or organizational targets. It's rarely that anyone during the Matrix activity will not be faced with a situation where they need to make a decision about achieving their individual task and individual objectives and what is right for the team or organizational organization. That's very much a subject that we come onto in the review period after the experiential activity, and often it provokes fairly strong emotions in that, where people have moved away from achieving their individual target for the good of the organization, or vice versa, they haven't done that. So the second learning objective is to consider how best to contribute individual effort to a team task. It's the nature of the Matrix activity that people are often faced with the decision, which is about how best to contribute to the overall effort. And very often in Matrix, the best thing to do is to do nothing at all. But that's quite difficult for many people working in modern organizations. So there's some good learning there about when to act and when not to act. The third learning objective is to understand the importance of correct and complete team briefing and effective ongoing communication in achieving shared goals. There's a considerable degree of strategy involved in the Matrix activity, and interpreting the strategy to correspond with the desired organizational outcomes is an important part of this planning piece before the group gets started. But also it becomes an emergent strategy, and the tactics and emerging strategy within the group while they're working means a substantial amount of ongoing communication. The fourth learning objective that we have in this list is to understand how to design effective networks and avoid problems in internal supply chains. So once we've done this activity and reviewed it with the group, very often the conversation will move to the workplace that the participants have come from, and to what extent they can translate the learning from the experiential activity, take it back into their organizations to explore their existing networks and team structures, and potentially make some improvements to those, and also their internal supply chain. Everybody in the matrix activity is both a customer and a supplier, and therefore it's a great activity for looking at internal supply chains. And finally, to explore appropriate management and leadership approaches when working in highly interconnected networks and matrices. Leadership is almost inevitably an issue for a group, even if I'm working simply on something like communication or team dynamics. Very often the leadership interventions that are made during the activity are highly influential, which makes it a strong contender for use in programs that do have leadership as part of their objectives. So they are a set of learning objectives. And what I'm going to do is ask Lara to introduce the first of our pre-recorded videos. One thing that I would say before we start this video is we pre-recorded these videos with the intention that we'd have live sound on them. Unfortunately, the sound quality wasn't good enough for this webinar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to voice over these videos. And I hope that any disconnect between what you're seeing on the screen and my voiceover, I hope that's not too confusing for you. So the first of these videos is what's in the bag. As you'll see, it is a fairly small bag that we package Matrix in, so that it's highly portable. And the first thing I'd say in the bag is we have a set of 16 fabric belts. Each one of those belts has 3 or 4 D-rings for connecting the connecting cords. We have 16 red cords. These are 2 meters long, and what these are used for is to connect people in the network. We also have a set of 12 white cords. These are slightly shorter, 1.5 meters. They're useful for differentiating between different types of cord, but also if you want a smaller footprint for your activity, if you're working in a smaller room, then the white cords give a smaller footprint. We have a bag of 64 plastic chain links, 16 in each of 4 colors. And finally, and very importantly, what we have is a set of target cards. Each individual working inside of the Matrix network will be given a card. There are 10 with 4 links printed on them. So here, blue, green, black, white. And we have another set of cards which have 3 links printed on them. So black, green, white in this case. And each card has a hole punched in the bottom for attaching the plastic links. You'll see how this activity works when we move into setting up and running the activity. So one thing that characterizes Matrix is that the requirement for the facilitator to do a little bit of homework, to think about how they're going to set up the activity. And that's we'd always advise, think about your learning objectives and set up the network accordingly. Unlike some of our exercises, this can be a quite extensive process. So it's well worth putting the time in advance and don't rush yourself beforehand. So the first piece of pre-work is deciding on the network shape that you're going to set up. And what I've asked Laura to do is to pull up a set of diagrams that might help me to describe this to you. So in these diagrams, the green dots are people in the network, and the red lines are connections, the cords that connect these people in the network. Now, this is a fairly compact, this illustration is a fairly compact network. And by that I mean there are lots of connections to each person in the network. There are some people who only have 2 connections, but the majority of people here have 3 or 4. What that means is that it's easy to move the plastic links around this network, which makes any use of matrix with this configuration relatively easy compared to some of the other networks that we can set up. So for an example of the next kind of network might be this one. And what we're trying to do here is represent an organization which has 4 sub-teams, each of 3 people, and they have limited connection with all of the other sub-teams in the network. So it should be relatively easy for them to work within the subgroup, but the connection through to other subgroups is via a single link. Now, this is going to be quite a challenging network to work in, largely because of the lower number of multiple connections. And what we might be looking at here is sub-teams working through a single team leader. The team leaders communicate with one another, but there's no direct connection between people in the subgroups and people in other subgroups. Moving on to kind of problems we can build into these networks, and that might be something we're just choosing to challenge the group, or this might be a bit of modeling of looking at a particular issue that exists within a client organization and trying to represent that in the network. So in this case, what we have is 2 halves of an organization or a team or a network, but the connection between them goes through a single individual right in the middle, the person right in the middle on that diagonal line. And any transaction between one half of this team and the other half of this team has to go through that individual. So they necessarily create a bottleneck in the system. So if I'm looking at the effect of a bottleneck, or what I'm doing is challenging the group to overcome that as an issue, I might set up as this kind of configuration. Finally, what we have here is a kind of very compact part of the organization, which is this main body on the left side of your screen. So that might be a head office, lots of people with lots of connections to one another. But at the top right, what we have is a remote office, for instance. So that might be a kind of regional office, and they communicate back to head office via a single link. Again, that might be a team leader, and that's going to cause something of a problem for this group, in that everything has to go through that point of contact between the remote office and the head office. There's also an issue here of what I'd call an outlier. So that's the individual at the bottom corner of this, bottom right corner of this diagram. They are working out on their own. It may be a kind of salesperson out on the road. It may be somebody who's operating a kind of single person office somewhere remote. And servicing that person might be very difficult within the matrix exercise, simply because they are in a bit of a cul-de-sac. They're out on their own there. So what we'd be doing is utilising this kind of configuration to look at the issues around kind of a remote team or an outlier from an existing team. So the next piece of pre-work we need to do after we've decided what shape of network we're going to use is making sure that we have the right number and range of target cards and the corresponding number and colour of plastic pieces in our system. This is an important part, and if the exercise goes wrong, it's frequently the mathematics involved in doing this. It's a simple counting job, but sometimes when we're a little bit stressed, when a group are about to arrive or we're late in arriving at our working room, the pressure of getting set up may mean that we miscount. It's important to take the time, and what I normally do is to work the night before and get this set up. What we're going to do is to show you a video which kind of illustrates this this piece of setup. So what we have is we've decided we're going to work with a group of say 12, and what I need is to have one card per participant. So in this case 12 cards, and I can discard the remainder of those cards. In selecting the cards, I'm aiming for a ratio of 2 cards with 4 links represented on them, and to every 1 card with 3 links represented on them. So in this group, what I'd have is 8 4-link cards and 3 3-link cards, making 4 3-link cards, making a total of 12 cards. And what I need to do is to count out exactly the right number and colour of plastic links that are represented on these cards. Now, to shortcut that process, every 4-link card has represented on it 1 of each colour. So if I know I have 8 4-link cards, I just count out 8 of each colour to start with. But then what I need to do is to go through each one of my 3-link cards and count out individually what's represented on those cards. So I've got 1 for each of the 4-link cards, and I can once I've been through that deck of cards, I can just assume that I've got everything covering the 4-link cards. But what I need to do is to count out the ones for the 3-link cards. So for every 3-link card, each card is going to be different. So in this case, what I have is a blue, a green, and a black on that card. So what I do is to take from the card 1 blue, 1 green, 1 black plastic link, add them to the pile that I'm going to have in play during the matrix activity. There's a black, a green, a white, etc. etc. So I'll go through each one of my 3 cards individually and count out those. If I've done all of that, what I should have is exactly the right number and colour of plastic links in my system. So now that I know I have the right tools to work with, what I can do is to set up the network that I designed on paper in advance of this. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to take the belts and I'm going to lay them out on the floor in my working room. Now, for the purposes of this video, what I'm going to do is to just think about one part of the network which has 3 people in it. Obviously, I'd do this for the whole group of 12. So what I'd do is to think about where these are going to go, lay them out according to the diagram that I have on paper. And then what I would do is to get these chords and lay them out too. These are the 1.5 meter cords, so I'm working in a fairly confined area. So what I do is to put them on the floor. What that does is gives me the opportunity to kind of visually reference the size and shape of the network and just check it against the pre-work that I've done. Once I've got it all laid out, what I do is to clip the cords onto the D-rings on the belt, go around each belt and make sure that the clips are linked into that, and then pull everything straight so that I have a real visual reference. Is this going to work? It also gives me a chance to say, is this network going to work in the space I'm working in, which is very useful where I've not seen the room in advance that I'm going to work in. And all of this equipment is washable, by the way, so I work outside on a regular basis if we get the weather. That might work for you in the people who are working in better climate than the west coast of Scotland. What I then do is to take the plastic links that I've counted out, and I've put these into chains. What I've decided is that what I'm going to do in this part of the network is to have 2 chains of 3 links and 1 chain of 4 links. And what I'm going to do is to attach these to the belts. My distribution here is at random, so I've not worried too much about the colours of these chains. And what I do is to clip them onto a spare D-ring on the belt. I'll speak later a little bit more about the distribution of these links if I want to do it in a way that's different to this random distribution. But it's the last thing I do before the group arrive is to make sure that the links are in there. So having decided my network, what I'm going to do is I've got it all laid out. So imagine my group have arrived. What I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is ask them to put them into the network. What that means is unclipping the belt for each person to unclip the belt, clip it around their waist, adjust the tension on the belt, so that it doesn't fall around down around their ankles, and then twist the belt so they have access both to the connecting cords and their chain of plastic links. Now, it would be worth at this point to speak a little about the terminology that we're going to use with the group before I go through the briefing process. And we've put together a short video just to explain what this terminology is. And what this might do is to kind of substitute for when I'm briefing this activity. Very often what I'm doing is pointing out things to the group. I'll go through the briefing sheet, but you can imagine when I am briefing the group before the start of the matrix activity, very often what I'll be doing is using this kind of terminology and just pointing out to them what I mean. So you have a video to describe that to you. So that's what we'll work with now. So you can imagine I've put on a belt, become part of this network, and I have cords that connect me to 2 other people in the network, which gives me less connections to someone at a different place in the network who may have 3 or 4 connections. What these cords enable me to do is to move the plastic links between me and one of the 2 connections by sliding them along the cord. So here I'll take a blue link, attach it to the cord, and I move it along. Now, obviously, this is going to work more effectively if there's a little bit of tension in the cord. These are elasticated cords, but it's important that there's not a great sag in the middle of them. So when I'm working with these plastic links, the only one that I have access to is the bottom one, at the open end. This is what I call a working link. And it's the only one. So in this case, I wouldn't have access to the white one unless I could get rid of the blue one. So if I do need access to the white one, for instance, the only way that I can do that is to get rid of the blue one to one of the people that I'm connected to. So in this case, I clip it onto the link, check to see the person can receive it, and send it away. Now I have access to the white link in that has become my working link. If I want to receive the blue one back, I'd need to ask for that. So this is what is represented by resource movement. The card that I have has the hole in the bottom, and it has 4 links on it, and for this card I need a blue one first. So what I'm going to do is ask to get the blue one back. I have several choices at this point in time. What I could do is to put it down to the bottom of the chain. That one now becomes my working link. What I could do is to simply move it on to someone else in the network, so I just become a transit point. Or the more decisive thing that might happen here is that I take it out of the system and attach it to my card. That's the first one I need for my card, the blue one, so I can attach it there. But recognize that once it's on that card, I can't take it off. So that's perhaps the most decisive thing that I can do with that card. So now, can I just check at that point if there are any questions that I need to answer? I'm getting a shaking head from Laura there. So what I'm going to do is just push forward and look at how we brief the exercise. And I'm conscious that this may seem like a lot of information. This is an experiential exercise, and like any experiential exercise, getting hands-on is the best way to understand it. So my advice to you is, if you possibly can, get hold of a set of matrix and experiment with it, see whether it works for you. That way you get to understand how it fits into to your work. But it is a really versatile exercise that can be applied against a lot of different kinds of learning objectives. Laura, what's the question? Excuse me.
Can I double check about counting pieces? Match the 3 link cards, and was it for the 4 link cards count 2 of each color into the task?
Yeah, the question is about that, making sure that we have the right color and number of pieces, plastic links that we're working in the system. What we need to do is, each one of the cards with 4 links on it has one of each color. So that what we do is to put, for every 4 card, we put one of each color into the system. For every 3 card, it will have a specific sequence of 3 different colors. So those colors, the 3 cards, the colors need to be counted into the system. It's part of the pre-work that you need to do. And when we distribute the cards around people, that again, some people will have a 3 card, some people will have a 4 card. We'll look at that in more detail when we look at the exercise in progress. So the briefing the activity. Now, this is going to seem like a fairly daunting set of briefing notes, and so for that reason, It's not as complicated as it looks, but it is detailed. So what I tend to do, there are other RSVP activities where I have in my mind, in my memory bank, what the instructions say. I never use just work from memory when I'm working with Matrix. I read the notes out to make sure that we get exactly the instructions to people. So here are the briefing notes, and what I do, as I said, is put the group into the network before you brief them up on this. It really does focus the mind, and also they can relate these instructions to what's happening around them. So these are the verbal notes I would give. You're working in an organizational network in which you have codes connecting you to other people. These codes represent either lines of communication or supply lines. Information and resources can only be moved along these lines. You may have direct connections between 1 and 4 other people in the network. Please do not touch the coloured links on your belt at this stage. These coloured links represent the information or resources that are to be moved around your network and get them to the right places to allow individuals to achieve their targets. You'll have a random assortment of either 3 or 4 links in a chain from your belt at the start of the exercise. So what I might do there is to point to one person in the network and show them what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the chain on their belt. Third point here is the overall aim of the exercise is to enable every individual in the network to complete their personal target, thus ensuring that the whole organizational target is achieved. Failure of one person to complete equals failure of the whole organization. So what we're aiming for is 100% success rate for the people in the network, everybody completing their card successfully. The fourth point here is to complete your target, you must collect the coloured links indicated on your target card and hang them in the correct sequence from the hole in the card. And what I often do is to have a spare card to illustrate this to people. When the final link is added to your target card, your task is complete and you will be removed from the system immediately. The connections from your belt will then be undone, closing down those communication lines. It's therefore important that you consider when to exit the system to avoid creating knock-on problems for other people. Movement of links around the system must be done according to some strict rules. And here are the rules for moving the pieces around the system. You may only take the bottom free link from the chain on your belt. This is referred to as a working link and is the only link available to be moved at any time. Again, I might point this out on the chain on somebody's belt. If you remove the bottom link from your chain, you must do one of 2 things with it. Put it directly onto the card or transfer it to someone else via a connecting cord. Links can only be transferred between people by sending them along the cord. They may not be passed hand to hand. If you receive a link from someone else, you must do one of 2 things with it. Put it directly onto your card or attach it to the bottom of the chain on your belt where it becomes your working link. I'm conscious in the video earlier we said there were 3 things that you can do. This idea of being a transit point, of receiving a link and moving it straight onto someone else, that shortcuts the process of putting it onto your chain as the working link, then taking it straight off and moving it elsewhere. So in effect, there are only 2 things you can do, but one of the acting as a transit point is just a shortcut for the attaching it to become your working link. You may never have more than 4 links in your possession at any time. This maximum of 4 includes links on your belt, links on your card, and links on a code until they've become accepted by someone else. A link remains your responsibility until it's taken by someone with the capacity to accept it. No links can be left hanging on connecting cords. And again, I'd probably illustrate that about how to send a link across a cord and checking to make sure that the other person can receive it, in that obviously if that person already has 4 in their possession, they're not going to be able to accept any more. Once a link has been attached to your card, it must remain there. You can't take that off that link. It's been attached to a card. Think of this as a resource that's been used. It's something that you've made the decision to take out of a system and consume it by attaching it to your card. So once it's on the card, it stays on the card. The one exception to this, the rule about taking somebody out, and we've got a video to illustrate this to you later, and it's something I'll often demonstrate to people. If you have a target card with 3 links on it, you may still have 1 link on your belt when you complete your card. If so, you may not accept any further links and must pass on the remaining link that's on your belt as soon as possible as your final move before stepping out of the network. Now that might seem confusing just at this point, but I do have a video to reinforce that, and I'll show you that video soon. So there are the instructions that we have, and we're now ready for the group to start working. And it's one of those activities that it's very rare to see a group just immediately begin to start moving pieces around. I don't know whether they're quite intimidated by the instructions we've given them, or just can't see a logical first step to this. And for that reason, very often what we get is a group who may otherwise not have planned activities before they get started. This one we can pretty well provoke them into doing a bit of thinking before they get started on this activity. It does require a fair bit of strategy, and very often it's establishing an initial strategy which occupies that time before they get started. What I'm going to do now is to just talk about one intervention once we've got the group started that's available to me as a facilitator. And the reason I'm including this at this point in time is kind of 9 times out of 10 when I'm doing this activity, I will make this intervention. So what I'm going to do is to describe it to you. And what this is letting the group work inside of a particular network and then offering them or intervening and imposing on them a set of extra codes which might make it possible for them to change the nature of the network. So let's imagine that I'm working with this kind of network. I was describing this earlier on. And what I'm going to do is to draw on this network just to illustrate this intervention I'm describing. So if the group are working with this, then I might leave them in that network for something like 20 minutes. If I've given them, say, 50 minutes to work in this network, 45, 50 minutes is kind of typical of the time that I would allow people to work with this. I would expect that after about 15, 20 minutes, the group are fairly frustrated by the difficulties of working on this in this network. And that's okay. There's plenty of learning in that frustration, particularly when what I do is intervene. I'll take a time out during the activity and say to them, okay, so I have 4 additional codes that I can offer you. It may be 4, it may be 3, it may be 2, it may be 1. But with this particular network, I may offer them 4 additional codes. And what I can either do is I can choose where those codes go, or better still, ask the group, if you had 4 additional codes available to you, which additional linkages would you put in? And I'd like the group to give me an answer on that. And after a bit of discussion, it's almost inevitable that what will happen is that they will choose to link up the periphery of this kind of network like that, making it a whole lot more of a compact network, a lot more connections in there. And what that does is removes the bottleneck of needing to work through those points of contact at the center of this network that they were working with. And the group's decision to do that, to me, is a rehearsal for what we would be doing later in the day, which is saying during the review process, of saying to the group, well, okay, going back to work, are there changes to your workplace network or team structures that you would advocate that would make it easier for you to work? And the memory of doing this might be the way of introducing that kind of activity. So, getting close to the end of my input now. So what I'll do is to just talk about finishing the activity. And it's what happens when somebody completes. I'll go through that before we look at adjusting the difficulty of the network. Here we have Michael. Michael has completed. He's indicated to me as the facilitator that he's completed that card. I check the number and sequence. Has he got a white, green, blue, black in this case? Yes, he has. So I take the link off him. I ask him to unclip his belt. I then ask him to clip the buckle together just to make sure that we stay neat and don't lose any of the links. Put that one down on the floor. And what I may suggest to Michael that he may kind of continue to observe. But one thing to note is that this is now what I call a dead link. There is no communication between Michael's colleagues on either side of him, because there is nobody in Michael's place now to move links across. The difference is that here's Graham. Graham's got a 3 card. He's told me that he's completed. So once again, I check this out, a white, a green, a blue. Yes, that's correct. So I'm quite happy. But what I've noticed is that Graham still has a blue on his belt. So what I would do is to tell Graham to stay in the network, not accept any more links that are passed to him, and as soon as he can get rid of the blue, get rid of it, and then we'll take him out of the network, but he can stay in till he gets rid of that blue. Okay, so that is pretty much a description of how the activity works. As I say, that will become a whole lot clearer when if you can get hands-on with the activity. But I've been asked on several occasions, how do I affect the difficulty of this exercise? And there are 3 difficulty adjustments that I can describe to you to now. So what I'm going to do is to go through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation of those. So the first difficulty adjustment might be adjusting the ratio of 4 link cards to 3 link cards. So the recommended ratio is 2:1, so that for every 2 4 link cards you issue, there should be 1 3 link card. So in a 12-person network, we've already seen, would issue 8 4 link cards and 4 3 link cards. Changing the ratio so there are fewer 3-link cards in play makes the exercise much more difficult. What that does is in effect, it reduces the capacity in the network. That is remember we've said nobody is allowed to have more than 4 pieces in their possession, so that it's only the people who are holding 3 links in their possession who can receive anything. And therefore they constitute the capacity in the network. If you reduce that capacity, it makes things infinitely more difficult. This is a pretty blunt intervention to make, is to change this. This is not something I'd recommend you to do. There are much more subtle ways of influencing the difficulty. The first of which is your initial design of the network shape. And connection density. In general, a compact network with lots of connections will be easier than a more fragmented network with limited connections. So the top one of those networks is going to be easier to work than the bottom one. And remember that intervention of adding new chords in moves the bottom network towards the same kind of connection density that you have in the bottom one. So obviously the top one's going to be easier than the bottom one. So your initial network design becomes really important. And within the facilitator's manual, there are examples of several different kinds of network that you may draw on. The final adjustment, and this is probably the most subtle and the one that I tend to use most often, is the initial distribution of the coloured plastic links. Remember in the video I did that on a completely random basis, but it doesn't have to be on a random basis. If we distribute the coloured links so that we concentrate particular colours at different areas of the network at the start of the exercise, will make the exercise more difficult. So in that diagram, if we concentrated the green links in the top left corner of the network, the white in the bottom left, the blue in the bottom right, and the black in the top right, what we're effectively doing is massively increasing the number of transactions that have to be made in order for people to complete their individual card, because pretty much everybody in this network is going to need different colours. So if what we have is a lot of green in one area and you need blue on your, if you're in that green area and you're looking for blue links, then those blue links have to come a very roundabout route to get to you, and it would take a lot of organisation to get them. So by concentrating, what we do is up the difficulty levels. Now, what I wouldn't do is to kind of saturate the area, so put all of the green in one area, all of the white in another area, etc. Just put a bit of a concentration, so that, you know, I'd guess about half of the links in any one area of your network are a particular colour. If you put too many, if you saturate it one colour, it becomes a real trial to negotiate the number of transactions you need to go through. So that's pretty much the matrix exercises. As you might hear the enthusiasm in my voice. I really enjoy using this exercise. So what I can do is in the remaining 10 minutes is take some questions. What I suggest that we do is anybody who wants to ask a question, if they go to the participants icon at the bottom, and there's a raise hand facility on that. Now, I think we already have a question. Laura's indicating to me we have a question. So, Laura, what's the first question?
Is it recommended for a large group to do a stage where you only have two groups of 8 nodes. This lets people experience the issue in thinking about what success looks like.
Yeah.
And give,
Sorry.
And then give them a break, and when they come back, give them a difficult 16-node network.
Who was that question from?
This is a question from Bruce.
Bruce, yeah, well done, Bruce. I use multiple iterations of this exercise on a lot of programs that I do, in that, yeah, we can have staged learning. So very often what I do is to put the group into a fairly simple network or two separate networks, run the exercise so that they do get experience of what are the decisions that they need to make, and some of the pitfalls, things like choosing. It's something that a group need to realize is that it's the people who have cards with only 3 links on them that make the network work, because they give capacity to the network. And if you take those people out too early in the exercise, you significantly reduce the efficiency of the network. So learning that kind of stuff first of all. So very often the kind of sequence I'll run is a simple network, then a network that more closely represents their workplace, or perhaps something which more closely relates to a set of learning objectives for the program I'm running, put them into that kind of network. And then very often the final stage that I'll move towards is giving the group access to a whiteboard and all of the matrix equipment, and say, okay, is there any further learning that you'd like to derive from going through the matrix exercise? What kind of network could you design which may be appropriate to addressing some needs in your workplace, or curiosity about what would happen if we organized in a particular way? So good question, Bruce. Yes, very often what I'll do is work with several iterations of this exercise. Thanks for the question. Laura, has another question come through?
A question from Ennis. One of the key learning focuses of this activity is change management, right? How do we use this experiential learning tool if our focus is change management? How can this activity help us if we are working on this?
Okay, so the question from Ennis is about change management and using this exercise in where one of our learning outcomes or all of our learning outcomes relate to change management. It's if I have an intact team from an organization, it depends how, and I'm looking at change management. What I could do is to, if this is pre-change, is take a look at what kind of things they can learn from this exercise by way of improving their preparation for the change to come. So what kind of things go wrong? What kind of things go right? Who needs to be communicating with whom during the change process? What is the end state that we're aiming to do? If I'm working during or after the change process, what I might do is to put the group into a network which fairly closely represents what they are currently going through, and saying to the group, okay, so what would make this easier? Are there things like changing the distribution of plastic links, increasing or changing the configuration of those lines of communication between people in the group? Allow the group to work in a very experimental way with the exercise, to experiment, well, if what we have is one central hub and people satellite around them, what difference would that make is in as opposed to having subgroups working. So what it does is you may not end up with them accurately representing the end state that they're looking for, but certainly it's an awareness raising exercise that says what kind of things can go wrong, what can we do to fix the things that go wrong, and how do we need to relate to one another through the change process that's before, during and after, in a way that means that we're not getting misunderstandings which are affecting our performance or the effectiveness, the success of the change initiative. So hopefully that's answered your question, Ennis. Any other questions, Laura? Just one thing that I will say is I mentioned leadership. We've got a little bit of time, so let me just touch on leadership inside of the this exercise. I mentioned earlier on the one thing about the matrix exercise is that if we have the leader who's actually in the network, so we've not left them, I mean, one option here is to have a floating leader. So, you know, maybe that what I do is to nominate a leader or have the group nominate a leader and not put them into the network so they can derive the benefits of being mobile and moving around the network to check out what's going on. But if I am putting the leader into the network, they're in a fixed position. And particularly if I have a distributed network, and you know what I have used in the past. The nature of the setup of Matrix means that I could have people working in different rooms with just a single line of communication going through a doorway or across a kind of movable boundary between two parts of a room. So what I can do is really isolate parts of the network. And if the leader is fixed in one place, it's very, very difficult for them to understand what's going on in other parts of the network. So how do you take a helicopter view of what's going on, and how do you get the information back from the field, back from more remote parts of your team? That might be a leadership area I'm working in. Very often what the leader's main task will be is facilitating the movement of links between subgroups. So it may be that one of the tactics that they employ is allowing subgroups to very much be to have self-determination, but the leader really focuses on the transaction that happen between subgroups. Third area that the leader may be working in is making decisions about where to focus at any time. As I say, if you have a network with a limited capacity to operate, so this limited capacity, it means that very often the leader has to choose, do we focus activity and get a lot of activity in one area of the network and then move that, shut that one down and move to another part of the network. So we have kind of differential levels of activity. That's often a leadership decision that needs to happen. And what that throws up for the leader is very often the need for them to keep people motivated while they're not very highly occupied inside of the network. So those, just off the top of my head, are very much kind of 4 leadership areas that I frequently pick up on if I'm using Matrix inside a leadership program or a program which has leadership as part of the learning objectives. Okay, I'm conscious that our hour is up almost exactly, so that's good timekeeping. So what I'm going to do is to thank you very much for being part of the webinar. It's been a bit of an experiment for us. I hope it's worked for you. As ever, please get in touch with us if you have any questions about Matrix or any other RSVP tools. And the matrix activity is available now in the store, the RSVP store. It's a secure store, so that please feel free to go in there and browse. And my strong endorsement would be to get hands on a set of matrix and look at the versatility of the tools and all the things that it can do for you and your learning activities. So thanks again, and I'll say goodbye now.